One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. The people who save your life rarely look powerful when you first meet them. Rain hammered against the tall windows of Blackmere Jazz House like handfuls of thrown gravel as Damian Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his charcoal Brioni suit and stared at the untouched glass of 18-year-old Macallan sitting beside his hand. The restaurant glowed gold beneath crystal chandeliers, soft trumpet music floating through the crowded room, while Chicago's elite laughed over steak dinners and seven-figure conversations. Damian barely heard any of it. His attention stayed fixed on the man across from him. Leonard Voss smiled too much. That was the first problem. Men negotiating biotech acquisitions worth $4.2 billion usually smiled carefully. Leonard smiled like a salesman who already knew the ending. "You built an empire fast," Leonard said smoothly, swirling bourbon in his glass. "Most men your age still waste time trying to impress people." Damian leaned back slowly. "I stopped caring about impressing people around the same time I started buying the buildings they worked in." A few people at nearby tables laughed quietly after overhearing him. Leonard forced a chuckle. But 20 feet away, Claire Holloway noticed something else entirely. The waitress balanced a silver tray against one palm, while weaving through tables with effortless precision, her black uniform crisp despite the chaos of a packed Friday night. Most customers remembered her eyes first. Calm gray-blue. Observant. The kind that noticed details people accidentally revealed when they thought nobody was watching. And right now, Claire wasn't watching Damian Whitmore. She was watching the new bartender. Tiny things bothered her immediately. The man had wiped the same glass 3 times. His breathing looked shallow. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. Not casually. Nervously. Claire slowed near the bar, just enough to glance at the reflection behind him in the mirror. His jaw tightened when he looked toward Damian's table. Then she saw the handoff. Small. Fast. A folded white packet disappearing beneath the counter. Claire's stomach tightened slightly. The jazz trumpet softened into piano. Outside, lightning flashed across the soaked Chicago streets. Inside, nobody noticed anything except money and music. Nobody except her. "Claire," the manager hissed from across the room. "Table 12 still needs their check." "Got it." Her voice stayed soft. Steady. But her eyes returned to Damian Whitmore. Billionaire. 40 under 40 cover stories. Cold genius. The kind of man newspapers described with words like ruthless and visionary in the same sentence. He was listening to Leonard now, distracted for exactly 3 seconds while answering a phone call through his earpiece. That was when the bartender lifted the Macallan bottle again. Claire saw the movement. Tiny flick of the wrist. Powder dissolving. Fast. Invisible. Her pulse kicked once. Hard. Then everything inside her became still. She crossed the room without rushing. Without panic. Her heels clicked softly across black marble floors while a waitress carrying oysters nearly collided with her. Damian turned slightly in his chair, one hand covering the phone against his ear. "Push the Zurich meeting to Monday," he said coldly. "I'm not repeating myself." Claire reached the table exactly as Leonard laughed at something that wasn't funny. She picked up Damian's whiskey glass naturally, like a waitress refreshing a drink. Then, in one smooth motion, she switched it with the untouched glass beside Leonard's elbow. Silent. Effortless. Damian saw it happen immediately. His eyes narrowed. Claire set the replacement glass down beside him calmly. "Fresh ice, sir," she said softly. Then she walked away. Damian stared after her. Leonard frowned down at the swapped glasses, confused for half a second before shrugging. Damian ended the call slowly. "Did your waitress just steal my drink?" Leonard joked. Damian didn't answer right away. Something about Claire's face bothered him. Not fear. Not flirtation. Not nervousness. She had looked at that glass the way soldiers looked at unexploded bombs in war documentaries. Across the room, Claire resumed serving tables as though nothing had happened. A wealthy couple argued over truffle pasta. Someone dropped a fork. The pianist shifted into a slower melody. Life continued. Damian kept watching her anyway. She never looked back toward him once. That was unusual. Everyone looked back eventually, especially after interrupting him. Leonard lifted the wrong whiskey glass with an amused grin. "To new partnerships," he said. He took a swallow. Then another. 30 seconds passed. Damian noticed it first. Leonard's smile faded strangely at the corners. One hand tightened against the edge of the tablecloth. His breathing changed. "You all right?" Damien asked quietly. Leonard blinked hard. Sweat appeared suddenly along his forehead despite the cool room temperature. Around them, laughter continued. Glasses clinked. Nobody noticed yet. Then Leonard reached for his chest awkwardly and collapsed sideways into the velvet booth, knocking silverware across the table. A woman screamed near the bar. The trumpet player stopped mid-note. Silence slammed across the restaurant. Damien stood instantly, chair scraping hard against marble. Several guests jumped to their feet in confusion while others grabbed phones. But through the chaos, Damien's eyes found Claire immediately. She didn't scream, didn't freeze, didn't panic. She moved. Fast, calm, purposeful. Claire crossed the room, grabbed a fallen whiskey glass using a napkin, then looked directly toward the bartender. The man was already backing toward the kitchen exit. Wrong move. Claire reached over the counter and slammed the emergency lock button beside the register before he could escape. Metal shutters dropped automatically over the rear hallway with a loud mechanical snap. Guests gasped. "Nobody touches the glasses," Claire said clearly. Not loud, just controlled enough that people listened instantly. Damien stared at her. Rain rolled down the windows behind her like silver rivers, while red emergency lights reflected softly across the polished floor. Claire's breathing stayed perfectly even. One elderly man near the piano lifted his steak knife irritably. "Can somebody die quieter?" he muttered. "This ribeye cost $92. A few stunned guests looked at him in disbelief. Claire turned toward him. Without missing a beat, "Sir," she said calmly, "if you keep eating before paramedics arrive, you might become part of the investigation." The old man slowly lowered his fork. Even Damien almost laughed. But the feeling disappeared quickly as realization settled heavily into his chest. Claire Holloway hadn't switched his glass by accident. She had saved his life. The flashing red and blue lights outside Blackmere Jazz House painted the rain-soaked windows in restless colors as paramedics rushed Leonard Voss through the front entrance on a stretcher, his face pale and confused beneath the glow of the city streets. Inside, the restaurant no longer looked elegant. It looked exposed. Wealthy guests huddled together whispering behind half-finished martinis, while police officers moved quietly between tables collecting names and statements. Damien Whitmore stood near the bar with both hands in his coat pockets, watching Claire Holloway from across the room. She had not sat down once. Not after everything. She spoke calmly with detectives, answered questions without hesitation, and somehow still found time to hand blankets to two elderly customers shaken by the chaos. One young officer frowned while writing notes into his tablet. "You noticed all that from across the room?" Claire nodded once. The bartender checked his watch every 30 seconds. "Maybe he had somewhere to be." "Maybe," Claire replied evenly. "But people who are nervous about time usually tap their feet." He kept checking the exits instead. The officer paused typing. "You some kind of profiler?" Claire gave the smallest shrug. "I wait tables." Damien almost smiled at that. Almost. A detective approached him next. "Mr. Whitmore, toxicology is preliminary, but it looks like some kind of sedative compound. Non-lethal dose from what we can tell." Damien glanced toward the ambulance lights disappearing into the rain outside. "So Leonard survives." "Looks that way." The detective lowered his voice slightly. "But if you had taken the first glass..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Damien looked back at Claire again. She stood near the piano now, wiping rainwater from her sleeve after, helping another shaken guest. She looked ordinary. That was the unsettling part. Nothing about her appearance matched the instincts she clearly possessed. No arrogance. No dramatic heroics. Just calm. Controlled intelligence hidden beneath a waitress uniform. "She saved your life tonight," the detective added quietly. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. "I know." Near the kitchen entrance, the elderly customer from earlier stabbed the last piece of steak on his plate while paramedics rolled equipment past him. "Honestly," he muttered to nobody in particular, "this place used to have better ambience." Claire walked by carrying a tray of untouched wine glasses and paused beside him. "Sir, you stayed through a criminal investigation for medium-rare ribeye." The old man looked offended. "Prime ribeye." Claire gave a slow nod. "That somehow makes it worse." Even one of the officers laughed under his breath. Damien watched her carefully after that. The way she moved through pressure reminded him of emergency surgeons he had once observed during a medical charity event. Efficient, unemotional, focused on outcomes instead of panic. Most people reacted emotionally first. Claire reacted logically first. That stayed with him. 40 minutes later, the restaurant finally began emptying. Guests hurried into black SUVs beneath umbrellas while thunder rolled over downtown Chicago. Blackmere Jazz House looked exhausted now. Dim lights, empty champagne glasses, wet footprints across marble floors. Claire stood behind the bar helping stack glasses when Damien approached for the first time since the collapse. "You switched the drinks before anyone touched them," he said quietly. Claire continued polishing a glass without looking up. "Yes." "How did you know?" "I did not." Damien frowned slightly. "That is not an answer. It is the truthful one." She finally looked at him then. Calm gray-blue eyes meeting sharp, dark ones beneath the low amber lights. "I noticed behavior that felt wrong. So I made a choice. A dangerous choice." "Not really." Her tone stayed even. "Worst case scenario, you got angry about your whiskey." Damien stared at her for a long moment. Most people either feared him or performed for him. Claire did neither. "You embarrassed me in front of a billionaire investor," he said. "You are welcome." Silence. Somewhere in the kitchen, a dishwasher crashed loudly, and somebody cursed under their breath. Rain continued hammering the windows. Damien rested one hand against the polished bar counter. "The detective says the dose was non-lethal." Claire nodded once. "Probably intended to make you vulnerable. Public confusion. Delayed reaction time. Easier to manipulate negotiations afterward." Damien studied her face carefully now. "You know a surprising amount about this." Something flickered behind her eyes. "Fast. Gone immediately." People notice strange things when they spend years observing others. Before Damien could press further, the restaurant manager rushed over, wringing his hands nervously. "Mr. Whitmore, I just want to personally apologize for tonight. This has never happened before in our establishment." Damien barely looked at him. "The waitress handled it better than your entire security staff." The manager blinked awkwardly. Claire immediately returned to stacking glasses like she had not heard the compliment at all. That bothered Damien more than if she had smiled. "You should go home," he told her quietly after the manager left. Claire let out a soft breath through her nose. "That would be nice. You seem tired." "I have been awake since 5:30 this morning." "Then why are you still working?" Claire looked around at the nearly empty restaurant. "Because somebody still has to clean up the mess." Damien followed her gaze. Broken glasses, wet floors, abandoned dinners, a violinist quietly packing his instrument near the stage. Strange. For the first time in years, Damien Whitmore suddenly felt ashamed that somebody else was cleaning a disaster meant for him. Claire lifted another tray. Damien reached for it automatically. She paused. "You do not have to do that." "Neither did you." Their eyes met again. Briefly. Quietly. Then together they carried the glasses toward the kitchen while thunder rolled over Chicago and the last ambulance lights disappeared into the storm. By the next morning, Chicago looked washed clean. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalks along Rush Street, while pale sunlight reflected off steel buildings and slow-moving traffic. But Damien Whitmore had not slept. His penthouse apartment on the 83rd floor overlooked the entire city, yet his attention stayed fixed on a single line inside the security report resting untouched on his marble kitchen counter. Claire Holloway. Age, 27. No criminal record. No active social media. Employment history limited. Education records incomplete. Damien hated incomplete information. It felt like weakness. Control came from details, patterns, predictability. Claire Holloway fit none of those things. He loosened his tie slightly, while his head of security stood nearby holding a tablet. "That is everything?" Damien asked quietly. "For now." "You are telling me a woman identifies suspicious behavior faster than trained security personnel, locks down an entire restaurant under pressure, and disappears into paperwork this clean?" The security chief hesitated. "Some people prefer privacy." Damien gave him a look cold enough to silence further commentary. "Nobody prefers privacy this much unless they are hiding something." He turned toward the windows again. Down below, tiny yellow taxis crawled through morning traffic like insects trapped between glass towers. Somewhere in that enormous city, Claire Holloway was probably serving coffee right now as if none of this mattered. That irritated him more than it should have. Most people spent days replaying moments involving billionaires. Claire had looked ready to forget him before the police even finished questioning witnesses. "Keep digging," Damien said finally. Quietly. You think she was involved? No, Damien picked up the report slowly. I think she noticed something everybody else missed. The security chief nodded once and left. Silence returned to the penthouse. Soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers while Damien stared down at Claire's name again. Then he did something strange. Something completely irrational. He canceled his afternoon board meeting. Blackmere Jazz House reopened that evening with polished floors, fresh candles, and nervous staff, pretending the previous night had never happened. Wealthy customers returned quickly because wealthy customers always returned quickly. Money hated discomfort but loved routine. Claire moved through the dining room carrying plates of cedar plank salmon while Jazz floated softly through the air once more. She looked exactly the same. Calm, focused, untouched by chaos. Her manager approached nervously while adjusting his tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Table 6 specifically requested you. Claire glanced toward the corner booth and nearly sighed. Damien Whitmore sat alone beneath the amber lighting wearing a dark navy coat over an open-collar black shirt. No tie tonight. Somehow that made him look even more expensive. You can tell him no if you want. The manager whispered quickly. Actually, no you cannot. Please do not tell him no. Claire picked up a water glass. Coward. Correct. The manager replied immediately before retreating. Damien watched Claire approach with the same measured expression he used during hostile acquisitions. It did not work on her at all. She set the water down carefully. Mr. Whitmore. Claire. You came back surprisingly fast for someone almost poisoned here. The steak is good. That sounds emotionally unhealthy. One corner of Damien's mouth almost moved. Almost. Claire pulled out her order pad. What can I get you tonight? Answers. Unfortunately, those are not on the menu either. You noticed details trained security teams missed. Damien folded his hands calmly. That is unusual. Claire scribbled something onto her pad without looking up. Medium rare ribeye. Garlic potatoes. Sparkling water. Damien blinked once. I did not order. You ordered the exact same thing last night. She finally looked at him. People repeat patterns when they are stressed. Silence. Damien realized she had profiled him within seconds. Again. You studied psychology? He asked carefully. No, law enforcement. No, military? Claire gave him a dry look. You watch too many movies. Before he could continue, an older woman near the stage suddenly snapped her fingers impatiently at a teenage busboy carrying drinks. Young man. She barked loudly. I asked for lemon 20 minutes ago. The teenager froze, clearly overwhelmed. Claire glanced over immediately. Excuse me one moment. She crossed the dining room quickly and returned less than a minute later carrying fresh lemon slices herself. The teenage busboy mouthed a grateful thank you behind the customer's back. Claire simply nodded once and resumed working like nothing happened. Damien watched all of it. Most people treated service workers like invisible furniture. Claire noticed them more than the customers. Interesting. Very interesting. You always rescue people? He asked quietly when she returned. Claire tilted her head slightly. Only the ones having bad nights. So I qualify now. You almost drank sedatives from a whiskey glass while negotiating with a man who smiled like a used car salesman. She tucked her pen behind one ear. Yes, you qualify. Damien laughed softly before he could stop himself. The sound surprised both of them. Claire blinked once. There it is. What? Proof you are technically human. He leaned back slowly, studying her beneath the warm jazz lighting. You are different when you are not surrounded by police officers. You are different without 12 lawyers standing behind you. I do not travel with lawyers. That somehow makes it worse. A trumpet player started a slow melody near the stage while candlelight flickered softly across the room. Around them, conversations blurred into low, elegant noise. Damien noticed something else then. Every time someone entered the restaurant, Claire looked toward the door automatically first. Every single time. Exit awareness. Environmental scanning. Habit. Not waitress behavior. Survival behavior. Damien's expression sharpened slightly. Who taught you to read rooms like that? Claire's hand paused against the edge of her tray for half a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Damien saw it. Then she smiled politely again. Would you like dessert tonight, Mr. Whitmore? He held her gaze for several long seconds. Claire smiled calmly back. Neither one looked away first. 3 nights later, snow drifted lightly across downtown Chicago as Claire Holloway stepped out of Blackmere Jazz House just after midnight. exhausted feet carrying her toward the subway entrance 3 blocks away. The city felt quieter after rain. Cleaner somehow. Steam curled from street grates while yellow taxi lights reflected across wet pavement like moving gold ribbons. Claire adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag against her shoulder and almost made it half a block before a dark gray Aston Martin rolled silently beside the curb next to her. The passenger window lowered. Damian Whitmore sat behind the wheel himself. No driver. No security convoy. Just him. Claire stopped walking slowly. "Should I be concerned?" she asked calmly. "Or are billionaires normally this dramatic?" Damian rested one hand against the steering wheel. "Get in." That sounded less like an invitation and more like a hostage situation. "Dinner. It is midnight. Chicago has 24-hour restaurants." Claire folded her arms lightly against the cold wind. "You track my schedule? You work the same shifts every week." That answer somehow made it creepier. Damian looked almost offended by that. "Almost. You saved my life." Again with the dramatic phrasing. "A normal person says thank you afterward." Claire glanced toward the subway stairs. Then back at him. Snowflakes landed softly in her hair beneath the streetlights. "Fine," she said finally. "But I have conditions." Damian narrowed his eyes slightly. "Conditions? No bodyguards. Done. No business calls. Reasonable. And if you are wearing a $12,000 watch under that coat, I reserve the right to insult you." Silence. Damian looked forward through the windshield for one long second. "It is an $18,000 watch." Claire stared at him. Then, for the first time since they met, she laughed openly. Warm. Genuine. Completely unguarded. Damian felt something strange happen inside his chest at the sound. Something unfamiliar. She slid into the passenger seat, still smiling faintly, while snow continued falling around the city. 20 minutes later, they sat inside a tiny diner on the north side that smelled like coffee, maple syrup, and decades of bad financial decisions. Damian looked profoundly out of place beneath fluorescent lighting and faded vinyl booths. Claire seemed perfectly comfortable. "This is where you brought me?" he asked carefully while staring at a menu laminated sometime during the Obama administration. "Relax," Claire replied. "Nobody here is trying to sedate you." A waitress shuffled over holding a coffee pot. "What can I get you folks tonight?" Claire pointed at Damian immediately. He would like to experience middle-class culture. The elderly waitress blinked once. "Honey, is he sick?" Claire nearly choked trying not to laugh, while Damian stared at both women with the quiet suffering of a man who had once negotiated billion-dollar mergers, but now found himself emotionally outnumbered in a pancake restaurant. "Coffee," he said finally. "Black." "See," Claire said proudly after the waitress left. "Growth." Damian leaned back slowly in the booth. "You enjoy this entirely too much. Watching rich men encounter normal life." Claire shrugged lightly. "It is one of my hobbies." "I am normal." Claire gave him a long look. "You own 3 penthouses. Only 2 technically belong to me personally." Damian. "Fine. Point taken." Snow thickened outside the diner windows while old country music played softly overhead. The strange thing was Damian did not hate being there. Nobody cared who he was. Nobody stared. Nobody tried to impress him. Claire rested one elbow against the table, studying him over her coffee mug. "So why are you really here?" Damian looked down briefly before answering. "You interest me." Claire sighed softly. That sentence never leads anywhere healthy. You knew something was wrong before trained professionals did. Observation is not magic. "No," Damian agreed quietly. "But it usually comes from experience." Claire looked away toward the windows. A police cruiser passed slowly through falling snow outside. "You always interrogate women over pancakes." "Only the ones who save me from chemical sabotage." There it is again. Damian frowned slightly. "What?" "You joke when you are uncomfortable." That landed more directly than he expected. Claire stirred her coffee slowly afterward, eyes thoughtful beneath the pale diner lighting. Damian studied her in silence. No expensive makeup. No performance. Just intelligent eyes that missed almost nothing. He suddenly realized something else too. Claire never once tried impressing him with stories or compliments or curiosity about his wealth. She treated him like a difficult but mildly amusing human being. It felt disturbingly refreshing. Then Damian's phone buzzed sharply across the table. Claire glanced at the screen automatically. Her expression changed instantly. Tiny. Sharp. "Do not answer that." Damien looked up immediately. Why? Claire leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the vibrating phone. Because whoever is calling you knows exactly where you are. Silence settled between them. Damien frowned. That is impossible. You arrived here without security. No public schedule. No assistant. Claire's voice stayed calm, but lower now. Yet your phone rings exactly 7 minutes after we sit down. The phone continued vibrating across the table. Unknown number. Damien looked at Claire carefully. You think this is connected? I think coincidence gets people hurt. Damien let the phone stop ringing unanswered. Neither spoke for several seconds afterward. Finally, the elderly waitress returned balancing pancakes and coffee refills. She glanced between them awkwardly. You two on a first date? Claire and Damien answered instantly at the exact same time. No, the waitress snorted softly. That usually means yes. Then she walked away before either could respond. Claire stared down into her coffee, trying not to smile again, while Damien looked out the diner window into the falling snow, suddenly realizing he had not thought about business once in the past hour. That had not happened in years. The phone never rang again that night. But the silence afterward stayed with Damien Whitmore long after he drove Claire home through the sleeping streets of Chicago. Snow drifted softly beneath streetlights, while jazz radio hummed low through the Aston Martin speakers. Claire watched the city pass quietly outside her window, arms folded loosely against her coat. Damien kept glancing toward her every few minutes without realizing he was doing it. Finally, Claire spoke first. You are thinking too loudly. Damien exhaled softly through his nose. You say strange things. You keep looking at me like I am a puzzle you intend to solve. Maybe you are. Claire tilted her head slightly. That sounds exhausting for both of us. He almost smiled again. Almost. The car stopped outside a modest brick apartment building on the north side. No doorman. No valet. Just old steps dusted with snow and warm yellow lights glowing behind worn curtains. Claire reached for the door handle, but paused. Do not answer unknown numbers for a while. Damien rested one hand against the steering wheel. You still think somebody is watching me? I think powerful men attract desperate people. She opened the door slowly. Cold air rushed inside the car. And desperate people become dangerous when ignored. Damien watched her step out beneath the falling snow. Then something unexpected happened. Claire leaned back toward the open window slightly. Thank you for the pancakes. Damien blinked once. You mocked me through the entire meal. Correct. A tiny smile touched her lips. But the pancakes were still good. Then she disappeared inside the apartment building, leaving Damien alone with the quiet sound of snowfall and the strange realization that he did not want the night to end. The next morning arrived gray and sharp over Chicago. Damien stood inside Whitmore Biotech headquarters surrounded by glass walls, digital screens, and people afraid to waste his time. Usually the environment energized him. Today it felt loud. His assistant hurried beside him carrying a tablet. Your Zurich investors moved the conference call to noon. Fine. And legal needs approval on the acquisition proposal. Later. She blinked in surprise. Damien Whitmore never said later. He walked into the executive conference room, where 12 board members immediately straightened in their seats. Billion-dollar projections glowed across giant screens while analysts shuffled papers nervously. Damien listened for exactly 4 minutes before realizing he was no longer paying attention. One executive droned on about market volatility while Damien's thoughts drifted somewhere far less logical. Gray-blue eyes. Quiet observations. Pancakes at midnight. Mr. Whitmore? Damien looked up sharply. The room had gone silent. You asked for my opinion, one executive said carefully. Damien stared at the charts another second before speaking calmly. You are all discussing numbers while ignoring behavior patterns. Confused looks spread across the table. Damien continued anyway. People reveal intent before they reveal action. Study that instead. The executives exchanged awkward glances. His assistant quietly made a note despite clearly having no idea what he meant. Damien noticed. And suddenly Claire's voice echoed in his head again. You joke when you are uncomfortable. Annoying woman. Meanwhile, across the city, Claire Holloway sat alone in a small laundromat beside humming dryers and old vending machines while reading through a worn paperback book on behavioral psychology. Steam fogged the windows while snow continued falling lightly outside. Her phone buzzed once beside her coffee cup. Unknown number. Claire stared at the screen without answering. Then the voicemail notification appeared seconds later. No spoken message, just silence. Her expression changed immediately. Calm, focused. A woman folding towels nearby smiled casually. Spam callers are getting ridiculous. Claire forced a polite smile back, but her stomach tightened slightly. Silence calls were not random. They were tests. She stood quickly, gathering laundry into her bag. 40 minutes later, Damien's assistant entered his office, carrying fresh reports. There is someone here insisting on seeing you personally. Damien barely looked up from his desk. No appointments until 3. She said you would say that. Something in the assistant's tone made him glance up. Claire stood in the doorway wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snow. Several employees outside the office openly stared. Damien stood immediately. What happened? Claire stepped inside and closed the glass door behind her. Somebody called me this morning. Unknown number? She nodded once. No message. Just silence. Damien's expression hardened slightly. My security team can. Monitor your phone. No, Claire. No security teams. She moved closer to his desk, lowering her voice. Whoever targeted you expected routine. Predictability. Expensive men trust expensive systems. Damien studied her carefully. And you do not. I trust patterns. Silence settled briefly between them. Outside the office, executives pretended not to stare through glass walls. Claire noticed immediately. Of course she did. Your employees are terrified of you, she observed quietly. Efficient leadership requires boundaries. No, Claire replied calmly. It requires trust. Fear is just faster. Damien leaned back slightly against his desk. You always criticize billionaires before lunch. Only the emotionally constipated ones. That hit him hard enough to almost laugh again. Almost. Then Claire's eyes shifted toward the framed article hanging beside his bookshelf. Man of the Year. Damien Whitmore redefines modern power. She walked closer to it slowly. Does any of this actually make you happy? Damien looked at the article for a long moment before answering. It used to. Claire turned toward him softly then. Not pitying. Just honest. Somehow that felt worse. You know what your problem is? She asked quietly. I suspect you are about to tell me anyway. Everyone in your life watches your money first. Her voice stayed calm, gentle even. So you stopped noticing who watches you. Silence filled the office after that. Deep, uncomfortable, real. Damien stared at her while snow drifted quietly beyond the towering windows of Chicago. And for the first time in years, the most powerful man in the room suddenly felt understood. 3 days later, the city of Chicago glittered beneath fresh snow and black luxury sedans as Whitmore Biotech hosted its annual winter charity gala inside the Grand Aurora Hotel downtown. Crystal chandeliers reflected against marble columns, while violin music floated through crowds dressed in tuxedos and silk gowns worth more than most people earned in months. Damien Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his black suit near the ballroom entrance, expression unreadable as investors and politicians greeted him one after another with polished smiles. Usually he moved through events like this effortlessly. Tonight, he kept checking the clock. You are distracted, his chief financial officer murmured quietly beside him. Damien glanced toward the entrance again. No, I am selective. About what? Conversations. Before the man could respond, movement near the ballroom doors caught Damien's attention immediately. Claire Holloway stepped inside wearing a dark emerald dress beneath a long winter coat. Her hair softly pinned back in a way that made several conversations nearby visibly slow down. She looked elegant without trying to, calm without pretending, dangerous without meaning to. Damien stared for half a second too long before walking toward her. Claire noticed instantly. You clean up surprisingly well for someone emotionally unavailable, she said softly as he approached. Damien looked down at his suit. This cost more than your car. That was not a compliment. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. You came. Claire removed her gloves slowly. You implied refusing would somehow become a 20-minute speech about trust and teamwork. You are exaggerating. Am I? Damien could not answer that honestly. Around them cameras flashed while champagne glasses clinked beneath golden ballroom lights. Claire's eyes moved calmly across the room instead of admiring the decorations. Exits first. Staff movement second. Security placement third. Damien noticed her scanning immediately. You still think somebody is watching. Somebody is always watching at events like this. Her tone stayed light, but her eyes sharpened slightly toward a waiter carrying champagne trays near the west hallway, especially people pretending not to. Damien followed her gaze automatically. "You know," he said quietly, "normal women usually compliment the flowers at galas. Normal billionaires do not accidentally collect attempted sabotage cases." Before he could reply, a silver-haired socialite suddenly appeared beside them, smiling too brightly. "Damien," she purred smoothly. "You did not tell us you were bringing someone." Claire offered a polite smile. Damien answered before thinking. "Claire is with me tonight." The woman blinked once. Tiny pause. Tiny surprise. Claire noticed it immediately. Of course she did. "How terrifying for everyone else," Claire said pleasantly. The woman laughed awkwardly and drifted away towards safer conversations. Damien looked at Claire carefully afterward. "You handled that well. I worked Sunday brunch for 3 years." Claire accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. Rich women are less frightening. Music swelled softly across the ballroom, while a charity auction began near the stage. Damien guided Claire toward a quieter corner table overlooking the city skyline through towering windows. Snow drifted outside like white ash beneath the lights of Chicago. For a few minutes neither spoke. Strange, comfortable silence. Then Claire's posture changed almost invisibly. Damien noticed immediately now. "What?" he asked quietly. Her eyes stayed fixed toward the bar across the ballroom. "Blue tie, near the whiskey display." Damien glanced carefully, without turning his head too sharply. A tall man stood near the bar, checking his watch repeatedly while pretending to text. "You know him?" Damien asked. "No," Claire's voice lowered slightly. "But I know behavior." The man looked toward Damien for exactly half a second before looking away too quickly. Same pattern. Same tension in the shoulders. Same exit awareness Claire had noticed inside Blackmere Jazz House. Damien felt his chest tighten slightly. "You think this is connected?" "I think he has watched you 14 times in 6 minutes." "You counted." Claire finally looked at him directly. "You are still alive because I count." Silence settled heavily between them. Then suddenly Claire smiled brightly and stood up. Damien frowned. "What are you doing?" "Improvising." Before he could stop her, Claire slipped her arm gently through his and leaned closer like an affectionate girlfriend posing for photographers. Nearby guests immediately began whispering. Damien went completely still. Claire kept smiling while speaking softly through barely moving lips. "Relax. We are being observed. You could have warned me first. Your panic face is entertaining." Damien looked genuinely offended. "I do not panic. You just blinked 4 times in 5 seconds." She guided him slowly across the ballroom toward the dance floor while the orchestra shifted into a slower melody. "Dance with me." "Absolutely not." "Too late." Claire pulled him forward before he could protest further. Several guests smiled approvingly while cameras flashed nearby. Damien placed one hand carefully against her waist with the hesitation of a man handling unstable explosives. Claire almost laughed. "You run billion-dollar corporations, but ballroom dancing terrifies you. This feels manipulative." "Correct." They moved slowly beneath golden chandeliers while snow drifted outside the giant windows behind them. Damien realized people had stopped staring suspiciously now that they appeared romantically distracted. "Clever. Very clever. You planned this fast," he murmured quietly. "People stop watching dangerous men once they believe a woman has softened them." Her eyes shifted past his shoulder suddenly. "There." Damien subtly turned his head. The man in the blue tie was leaving quickly toward the west hallway. Claire's expression sharpened instantly. "He is moving too soon." Damien tightened his jaw slightly. "Security?" "No." Claire's hand pressed lightly against his arm. "If security reacts now, whoever sent him disappears. Then what do we do?" For the first time all evening, Claire smiled with something almost playful in her eyes. "We become the most annoying couple at this gala." Damien blinked once. "That is your strategy?" "Trust me." She leaned closer suddenly, speaking near his ear while cameras flashed around them. Nobody notices surveillance when 2 rich people are pretending to fall in love. And somewhere beneath the orchestra music, the snow, and the glittering lights of Chicago, Damien Whitmore realized he was no longer pretending nearly as much as he should have been. The man in the blue tie disappeared into the west hallway just as the orchestra reached the final notes of the dance. Around them, wealthy guests applauded politely, completely unaware that Claire Holloway's eyes had already shifted into calculation mode again. Damien Whitmore felt it immediately now. The subtle tension in her posture. The silence before action. Claire stepped away from him smoothly, still smiling for nearby cameras while speaking under her breath. Keep looking relaxed. Damien adjusted his cufflinks automatically. You realize I have never once looked relaxed in my life. That is unfortunately true. She picked up 2 champagne glasses from a passing tray without slowing her pace. Walk with me. Together they crossed the ballroom like 2 people casually escaping small talk instead of quietly following a possible threat through one of Chicago's most expensive hotels. Snow swirled beyond the tall windows while violin music faded behind them. The west hallway was quieter. Softer lighting. Fewer guests. Damien noticed the blue-tied man near the elevators speaking briefly with hotel staff before disappearing around the corner. Claire slowed immediately. Do not follow too close. I know how surveillance works. No, Claire replied calmly. You know how acquisitions work. Different species. Damien almost argued. Almost. Instead, he watched her carefully. Who taught you all this? Claire remained silent for several seconds. Then she sighed softly. 5 years ago, I worked for a private behavioral analysis firm in D.C. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. Behavioral analysis. Corporate risk assessment mostly. Identifying unstable patterns before situations escalated. They reached the hallway corner. Claire stopped suddenly beside a decorative marble column and lightly caught Damien's wrist before he stepped farther. Wait. Her voice stayed low. Controlled. Damien froze instantly. Around the corner, 2 hotel employees stood near a service cart pretending to organize silverware while quietly watching the ballroom entrance far too closely. Claire observed them for exactly 3 seconds. They are not hotel staff, she murmured. How can you tell? Shoes. Damien blinked once. Shoes. Real hotel staff walk 12-hour shifts. Their shoes show wear differently. She released his wrist slowly. Those shoes are new. Silence. Damien stared at her carefully. That is insane. Correct. Claire glanced toward the ballroom again. But I am still. Right. Damien exhaled softly through his nose. You know this is the part where normal people call security. And alert whoever organized this. Claire shook her head once. No, one of the fake employees suddenly looked toward them. Too fast. Too direct. Claire immediately smiled and leaned casually against Damien's shoulder like an affectionate girlfriend whispering something private. Damien went completely still again. You really enjoy weaponizing romance, he murmured quietly. You really enjoy surviving. The fake employee looked away after a moment. Claire slowly straightened. We leave now. That sounds serious. Because it is. They returned toward the ballroom at a controlled pace, neither rushing nor drawing attention. But Damien noticed Claire scanning every reflective surface now. Windows, mirrors, polished silver trays, constant awareness, constant calculation. It finally clicked into place inside his mind then. This was not talent. It was conditioning. Somewhere in her past, Claire Holloway had learned to survive by noticing danger before danger noticed her. Back inside the ballroom, guests laughed beside the dessert tables while politicians posed for photographs under crystal chandeliers. The contrast felt surreal. A world built on appearances. Damien guided Claire toward a quieter private lounge overlooking the city skyline. The moment the door closed behind them, the noise softened instantly. Warm amber lamps, leather chairs, snow drifting beyond floor-to-ceiling glass. Claire finally exhaled. Small. Tired. Damien noticed that too. You should have told me sooner, he said quietly. Claire rubbed her hands together against the cold lingering in her fingers. About what? That you worked behavioral intelligence. And then what? She looked at him carefully. You hire me? Add me to one of your security teams? Turn me into another expensive tool. Damien frowned immediately. That is not fair. No, Claire agreed softly. It is accurate. Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere far below, Chicago traffic crawled through snowy streets like streams of moving light. Damien loosened his tie slowly. What happened in D.C.? Claire looked away toward the windows. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then finally, quietly, I missed something. Damien stayed silent. Claire continued anyway. A client ignored warning signs around one of his business partners. I noticed the behavioral shifts too late. Her voice remained calm, but Damien saw the exhaustion underneath it now. Old guilt. Deep guilt. Nobody died. she added softly before he could ask. But people got hurt financially. Reputations collapsed. Careers disappeared overnight. She folded her arms lightly. After that, I left. Damien studied her carefully beneath the warm amber lighting. So now you wait tables. People reveal themselves over dinner surprisingly often. One corner of Damien's mouth moved faintly again. Then his phone buzzed sharply across the glass table between them. Claire's eyes instantly dropped toward the screen. Unknown number again. Silence filled the room. Damien looked at her once before answering this time. He pressed speaker mode without speaking. For 3 seconds, there was nothing except static. Then a man's calm voice finally spoke. You should stop bringing civilians into dangerous situations, Mr. Whitmore. The line disconnected immediately afterward. Claire's expression changed instantly. Cold focus. Damien looked at the dead phone screen while something dark settled inside his chest. They knew about Claire now. Snow drifted silently beyond the windows while the city lights blurred beneath the storm. Damien looked up slowly toward her. You should leave. Claire stared back at him. No, Claire. If they wanted me scared, they should have chosen somebody else. Silence. Deep. Sharp. Real. Then, unexpectedly, Damien laughed softly under his breath. Not because anything was funny, but because for the first time in years, he had met someone who refused to run when power, danger, and fear entered the room together. And somewhere between the snow outside and the quiet breathing inside that private lounge, Damien Whitmore realized he trusted Claire Holloway more than almost anyone in his life. The snowstorm over Chicago worsened overnight. By morning, the city looked muted beneath gray skies and frozen streets while Damien Whitmore stood alone inside his penthouse staring at security footage replaying across 6 separate monitors. Every angle from the Grand Aurora Hotel, every hallway, every ballroom entrance, every elevator. Claire Holloway sat quietly on the leather sofa nearby holding untouched coffee between both hands while Damien's security team moved nervously around the room. Nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. Not after the phone call. Damien paused the footage suddenly. Back up 3 seconds. The technician obeyed immediately. The image rewound near the ballroom hallway where the fake hotel employees had been standing. Damien leaned closer. Claire stood slowly beside him. There. She pointed toward the reflection in a mirrored column. A man briefly appeared in the background before disappearing again. Tall. Dark coat. Familiar posture. Damien's expression hardened instantly. That is impossible. Claire looked at him carefully. You know him. Silence filled the penthouse. Heavy silence. Finally, Damien nodded once. Elliot Graves. One of the analysts looked confused. Your chief operations officer? Damien kept staring at the frozen image. He has worked beside me for 11 years. Claire watched Damien's face more than the screen now. Shock looked strange on powerful men. Quieter than people expected. You trust him, she said softly. Damien let out a hollow breath through his nose. I trusted a lot of people. Nobody spoke after that. Outside the giant windows, snow whipped violently between skyscrapers while the city disappeared beneath white haze. Damien walked slowly toward the bar counter, but did not pour a drink. Claire noticed immediately. Progress. Small but real. Why would he target you? One security analyst asked carefully. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Because Elliot built half this company beside me. He looked toward the frozen image again. And men who stand next to power long enough eventually wonder what it feels like to own it. Claire stayed silent. She understood that kind of betrayal too well. 20 minutes later, Damien dismissed the security team entirely despite their protests. The penthouse finally became quiet. Again, just soft piano music from hidden speakers and snow scraping gently against glass 83 floors above Chicago. Claire stood near the windows watching the storm while Damien loosened his tie slowly behind her. You already suspected someone close to me, he said quietly. Did not you? Claire nodded once. Outside threats create chaos. She turned toward him softly. Inside threats create access. Damien laughed once under his breath. Bitter. Tired. You really do ruin optimism professionally. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Then Damien's phone buzzed again across the marble counter. This time the caller ID displayed a name clearly. Elliot Graves. Silence settled instantly between them. Damien stared at the screen for 2 long seconds before answering. Elliot. The voice on the other end sounded calm. Familiar. You look tense lately, Damien. Damien's eyes darkened slightly. Interesting timing for a social call. You disappeared from the gala unexpectedly. Elliot chuckled softly. People noticed. Claire watched Damien carefully now. Tiny changes in breathing. Eye movement. Tension in the jaw. What do you want? Damien asked flatly. A conversation. Elliot's tone stayed smooth. Without security teams. Without analysts. Just old friends. Claire shook her head immediately from across the room. Damien saw it. Ignored it. Where? Your private marina on Lake Michigan. 1 hour. The line disconnected. Silence. Claire crossed the room instantly. Absolutely not. Damien stared down at the dead phone screen. I need answers. No. Her voice sharpened slightly for the first time since they met. You need leverage. Those are different things. Damien looked up at her carefully. You are scared. Claire folded her arms tightly. I am realistic. You said yourself inside, threats create access. Damien grabbed his coat from the chair nearby. That means Elliot already knows too much. Then we use authorities. And tell them what? Damien snapped suddenly. That my closest executive might be psychologically destabilized? Silence crashed into the room after that. Damien immediately looked away toward the windows, regret flickering briefly across his face. Claire remained still for a moment before speaking quietly. That is not really what you are angry about. Damien closed his eyes briefly. No. Snow drifted violently beyond the glass while piano music continued softly behind them. Finally, Damien looked back toward her again, exhaustion replacing frustration. He was at my father's funeral. His voice stayed low now. Honest. He helped build this company from almost nothing. Claire stepped closer slowly. And now? Damien gave a hollow laugh. Now I do not know if he spent the last decade protecting me or positioning himself beside me. Silence. Deep. Painfully human. Claire reached for her coat quietly. Damien frowned. What are you doing? Coming with you. No, Damien. Absolutely not. He stepped closer immediately. If Elliot realizes you identified him first, you become a target. Claire held his gaze calmly. Too late. Neither moved for several seconds. Snow swirled outside. The city glowed pale beneath the storm. Then Damien did something unexpected. He reached forward carefully and adjusted the scarf near Claire's shoulder where it had twisted beneath her coat collar. Gentle. Automatic. Intimate in a way neither of them acknowledged aloud. Claire went very still. Damien seemed to realize what he had done half a second later. His hand slowly lowered. Silence stretched between them again. Different this time. Softer. More dangerous somehow. You should stay here, Damien said quietly. I am not losing another person because somebody around me wanted power. Claire looked up at him beneath the warm penthouse lighting. Calm gray-blue eyes meeting exhausted dark ones. You are finally starting to understand something important. Damien frowned slightly. What? Claire's voice softened almost into a whisper. The people worth loving are always more important than the things worth owning. Silence filled the room after that. Real silence. The kind that changes people quietly from the inside. And somewhere beneath the storm outside and the city lights below, Damien Whitmore realized the thought of Claire getting hurt frightened him far more than the thought of losing his empire ever could. Lake Michigan looked almost black beneath the winter storm as Damien Whitmore's private marina disappeared into drifting snow and frozen wind. The docks creaked softly against dark water while distant city lights flickered through the haze like fading stars. Damien stepped out of the Aston Martin alone, coat collar lifted against the cold, his expression unreadable beneath the pale security lights lining the marina entrance. But he was not alone for long. You are terrible at following instructions. Damien turned immediately. Claire Holloway stepped from the shadows near the dock office wearing a dark wool coat and snow-covered boots, hands buried deep in her pockets. Damien closed his eyes briefly. Claire, you said not to come. Correct. And you still drove here alone. She tilted her head slightly. Which means one of us clearly makes poor decisions under emotional stress. Despite everything, Damien almost laughed again. Almost. Snow swirled harder between them, while the frozen lake groaned softly in the distance. You should be angry, he said quietly. I am. Claire stepped closer through the snow. But I can multitask. Before Damien could answer, a familiar voice carried across the dock, still bringing civilians into complicated situations. Elliot Graves emerged from the far end of the marina beneath the pale lights, hands inside the pockets of his dark coat. Calm. Controlled. Like a man arriving for dinner instead of confrontation. Damien stared at him for several long seconds. You poisoned Leonard Voss. Elliot shrugged lightly. Sedated. There is a legal distinction. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly at the casual tone. Elliot noticed her immediately. You are smarter than the reports suggested. Damien's expression sharpened instantly. You investigated her. Of course I did. Elliot looked almost amused. The mysterious waitress suddenly appears before every security failure involving the most powerful man in Chicago? I had questions. Claire remained calm. You were trying to destabilize Damien before the merger. Elliot smiled faintly. Not destabilize. Liberate. Snow drifted across the docks while icy wind rattled metal railings around them. Elliot stepped closer slowly. Damien built an empire brilliant enough to change global medicine. But somewhere along the way, he became sentimental. His eyes shifted briefly toward Claire. Predictable. Damien's jaw tightened. You tried manipulating my company through fear. No, Elliot's smile faded slightly. I tried reminding you what power costs. Silence stretched across the frozen marina. Then Damien spoke quietly. You could have just walked away. Elliot laughed softly beneath the storm. Men like us do not walk away from empires, Damien. Claire noticed something then. Tiny shift. Elliot kept positioning himself between Damien and the docked yacht behind him. Blocking visibility. Blocking movement. Her eyes sharpened instantly. He is not alone, she murmured quietly. Damien understood immediately now. He trusted her instincts without question. That realization surprised him even in the moment itself. Elliot noticed the exchange too. Interesting, he said softly. You actually listened to her. More than I listened to you lately. That landed harder than Damien intended. Elliot's face changed for the first time all night. Hurt. Brief but real. I spent 11 years protecting this company beside you, Elliot said quietly. And then one waitress walks in and suddenly you see me as the enemy. Claire stepped forward before Damien could answer. No, her voice stayed calm against the storm. He started seeing you as the enemy the moment you stopped seeing him as human. Silence. Snow fell harder. Elliot looked at Claire carefully for several long seconds before laughing softly under his breath. That is what this really is, then. His eyes shifted toward Damien again. You are in love with her. Damien froze. So did Claire. The wind howled across the marina while frozen waves crashed softly against the docks below. Elliot shook his head slowly. That explains everything. Then suddenly he looked tired. Not dangerous. Just exhausted. You know the funny thing about powerful men? He asked quietly. They spend their entire lives believing money will protect them. His eyes moved toward Claire once more. But in the end, it is always one person who changes everything. Silence settled over the marina after that. Deep. Heavy. Real. Then Elliot slowly reached into his coat pocket. Damien immediately stepped slightly in front of Claire without thinking. Protective. Automatic. Elliot noticed. A strange sadness crossed his face before he finally pulled out a small flash drive and tossed it across the dock toward Damien. Financial records, he said quietly. Every offshore account. Every manipulated transaction. Everything. Damien caught it carefully. Why give this to me? Elliot looked out toward the frozen lake. Because despite everything, I still remember who you used to be before this world convinced you trust was weakness. Snow gathered across his shoulders while silence stretched between them one final time. Then Elliot turned and disappeared slowly into the storm without another word. Damien stood motionless for several seconds holding the flash drive while the wind cut sharply across the empty marina. Finally, Claire stepped beside him quietly. You okay? Damien looked down at the frozen docks beneath their feet. No, honest. Simple. Human. Claire moved closer beneath the storm without speaking. Just close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Sometimes that kind of silence mattered more than advice ever could. Damien looked at her then. Really looked at her. The woman who switched a glass without hesitation. The woman who saw danger before everyone else. The woman who somehow walked into his carefully controlled life and made him remember there were still things more valuable than power. Claire. Her gray-blue eyes lifted toward his. Snowflakes melted softly in her hair beneath the dock lights. Damien exhaled slowly. I think I fell in love with you somewhere between the poisoned whiskey and the pancakes. Claire stared at him for half a second. Then she laughed quietly through the storm. Warm. Genuine. That is still the strangest love story I have ever heard. Damien smiled fully for the first time since she met him. Real smile. No armor behind it anymore. Claire stepped closer then, one hand lightly resting against the front of his coat while snow drifted silently around them. Good, she whispered softly. I was hoping you would say it first. Then she kissed him gently beneath the falling snow while Chicago glowed quietly in the distance, and Lake Michigan stretched endlessly behind them like dark winter glass. And for the first time in years, Damien Whitmore no longer felt like the richest man in the city. He felt like the luckiest. If this story touched your heart, please like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more powerful stories of love, dignity, and unforgettable second chances. Your support helps us keep creating emotional journeys like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that could change your day.